Hello, folks. So, we're just going to wrap up our final part of this three-part recording we've done on the nature of nature. And our focus tonight is just going to be on part three, which is the synthesis, the grain of truth in each of the views that we've examined over the course of our conversation. So, let me try to gather the threads. If part one was the romantic transcendental invitation, and part two was the Greek Nietzschean test, this part is the weaving. Not a compromise, but a stance sturdy enough to carry both consolation and confrontation. I want to affirm the grain of truth in each voice, then fold them into a few principles you can feel in your bones and carry into practice. So here's some of the grains of truth, one by one. Let's begin with Thoreau. So Thoreau's wisdom is re-enchantment through attention. He's right that wildness preserves what the machine phrase: attention, proportion, gratitude, and conscience. The forest doesn't pamper, it reproportions. When we slow down enough to listen, the world is not background, it becomes presence. Thoreau's tonic is real. For instance, on a phone-free half-hour walk, the knot in your chest loosens. By minute 7, you're noticing wind in the cedars, and a problem that felt impossible quietly untangles. Presence is a start, but to endure, presence needs proportion. That's where the Greek sense of measure steps in. And this is where Anaximander comes into play, whose wisdom, I think, touches on the mercy of measure. He's right that there is order without moralizing. Push too far and you're returned. Not punishment, physics. Limits are not enemies. They are the guardrails that keep a song singable. Measure, return, proportion. These are love in structural form. For example, you set a 2:30 p.m. turnaround time on a long hike and you keep it, even with just one more ridge calling, so the day ends safely and satisfyingly. Yet measure is never static. It's kept alive inside a world of flux and tension. Heraclitus' home ground. And I think in talking about Heraclitus, the wisdom of his viewpoint is the truthfulness about strife. He's right that becoming is the rule, not the exception. There is no final resting place beneath things, only tensions that make music, if we can bear them. He writes, quote, "Nature loves to hide," unquote. And the work is to think from within the burn. For instance, the same switchback is ascent in the morning and descent at dusk. Your quads and knees alternate complaint, and the day's music depends on how you hold that strain. And if flux and friction can't be escaped, the next question is whether we can affirm them. Nietzsche's demand. And I think at looking at Nietzsche, his wisdom, I think, comes from affirmation and form. He's right that nature is not a therapist. It is Dionysian, ecstatic, indifferent, fertile in its violence. If we wait for the world to be morally agreeable before we affirm it, we'll never affirm it. The honest reply is style. Give your chaos form. Apollo as the cup that carries the wine. Amor fati as daily courage. For instance, a storm cancels your summit to the mountain, and you say a quiet yes. You choose a new route and turn the setback into a story, a sketch, a meal plan. The day becomes composed rather than ruined. But even affirmation needs a place to happen. Heidegger asks how anything appears to us at all, and how not to crush it under use. And Heidegger's wisdom, I think, is encapsulated by letting be and disclosure. He's right that our age inframes, turning beings into inventory. The counter move is to let things come forth, truth as unconcealment. A hike, a silence, a patient look, small clearings where the world can show itself instead of being forced to perform. For example, you pause at the overlook without photographing or tracking, just breathing until the falls step into presence. Afterward, you jot 10 lines, letting description follow disclosure rather than replace it. So that's a brief summary of what I take to be the grains of truth in each of those uh, philosophical viewpoints towards nature. And Ryan, what's your gloss on all of the voices we've looked at, and do you see there being wisdom in each of their viewpoints, or do you maybe side with one voice over the others? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the romantics, of course. I think most people watching this uh, will be as well. Um, in a lot of ways, I think we're still kind of living in that shadow or in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. We're some might say we're approaching a new revolution with AI and all this technology that we have available to us. But the problem still, I think, somewhat remain the same in that our connection to nature and to the wild is something that is increasingly difficult to maintain. Um, Especially if you live in a city or something like that. Um, I think Nietzsche understands the romantics, and he even engaged in a lot of these activities that someone like Thoreau would, long walk, staying in a cabin, um, having some time away from industrialized, mechanized life. Um, so I think even someone like Nietzsche had his sympathies in ways to the romantics. Um, I still kind of view the romantics as somewhat like the romantic view is somewhat of an aristocratic take on nature. Um, I picture, when I think of the romantics, I picture people in old suits of armor, going and hunting game,
Mm-hmm.
with their fellow aristocrats and their helpers or whatever, their
Yeah,
servants. Um, almost like people go golfing. You know what I mean? Like you got your caddy with you. And, oh, hand me the weapon.
right. Yeah.
um, so I'm not sure how much any of that really truly gets us in contact with nature. I feel like it might be a bit of a sort of a tonic, like a short term remedy for things. Um, and I'm not sure there's really any way of truly going back to that Greek Nietzschean conception of nature. Like, the Greeks lived in a very different way than we live today, like in a very immediate contact with nature, even, in the grand cities that they lived in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's still just without the mechanized life, like you're still at the mercy of nature in a lot of ways. And the immediacy with which they felt nature and lived with nature, um, just really isn't possible in our societies. There might be places in the world, certain tribes that live still live like that. Um, but it's hard for us as people who live in the wake of the industrial revolution to really conceptualize what that reality is really like and what it would be to live that way. um, Now, so I think I have my romantic sympathies, but in some way I really think that the Greeks got it right. The romantics are in some ways reactionary to something besides nature, and I'm not quite sure that their viewpoint on nature is entirely correct. I think their view on nature is very much situated within the context and the issues that they're currently facing in modern life. I think maybe maybe it's correct, but perhaps the picture isn't quite full. And it comes from being, like I said, in the position that we're in. We're truly conceiving of nature in the way that the Greeks did is such a hard thing for us to do because we're so far removed from that. Um,
Right.
yeah, so I guess my sympathies and my practices are very much romantic, but I would like to say that the Greeks and Nietzsche, who's what would you say, he's kind of echoing the Greek view of nature. I think there's something there that's missing from the romantic perspective that that is correct. Um, you know, Nature as something that is not moral in and of itself, and something that is dangerous and chaotic and um, isn't all sunshine and roses. You know what I mean? Um,
Right.
I think that is very true. If, if you're well acquainted with the forces of nature. Um, so, yeah, does that answer the question? I mean, that's kind of my long-winded
Yeah. No,
reflection on things.
I can kind of get the gist of what you're saying there. Like it seems like you have sympathies both to the romantic and the Greek view, and that from our current, you know, standpoint where we are in the 21st century, we're more aligned with the romantics in our worldview. We view nature still as a redeemer, as a healer. Um, um, you know, we see this in things like people going for day hikes on weekends and you know spending time in nature immersion, forest bathing. Um, all of which there's documented scientific studies and evidence showing that time spent in nature decreases cortisol levels, stress hormones, and so on and so forth. So I think nature is a tonic in that sense, but that's not all nature is. I mean, I think that um, the the virtue that we gain from considering all these voices is that um, you know nature is complex and multifaceted, and while nature is a tonic, a healer, a redeemer, the nature is very much the opposite of that as well. Depending on your experience, your situation, within nature. and as a part of nature. Um, if you're stranded on a desert island without all the comforts and luxuries of modern life, left to fend for yourself, like Robinson Crusoe or something like that. Just going off your survival instincts alone, I think you'd soon realize that nature is also potentially a destroyer, or like we said earlier, it's a crucible. It's a force that will test you. It'll test your resolve. Especially if you're in like a survivor man type scenario. Having to chop down wood to build your own, um, you know, um, shelter, having to hunt your own food, or forage your own vegetables, or what have
Make,
you. So
I was gonna say, or make your own friend out of a volleyball.
yes, exactly.
Chuck Nolan from
Yeah,
Castaway.
yeah.
Wilson.
Nice shout out to Castaway. That example was also coming to mind as well. Um, yeah, so I think um, nature is both light and dark, and there's shades of gray in between. And I think all of the thinkers that we've talked about over the course of our chat, bring that to light, especially like Thoreau maybe more towards the light end of the spectrum, and then maybe Heraclitus and the ancient Greeks, Anaximander, and the modern ancient Greek Nietzsche, not technically Greek, but a mouthpiece for ancient Greek thought and wisdom. So, yeah, yeah, I think you're spot on there, Ryan. I probably have similar sympathies myself, and I think that nature is, a redeemer. Nature, um, when we harmonize ourselves with nature, nature is something that can um, elevate the quality of our life. At the same time, nature can do quite the opposite. Um, you know, Regardless of whether we're aligning ourselves with what we tend to be, what we take to be the correct path or the correct way. If nature is amoral and indifferent, it doesn't really care for that much. Just as a meteor, you know, on course to impact Earth and obliterate all existence, doesn't really care too much about your moral principles, or your conduct in the world. But um, in any case, yeah, I think that's my synopsis, Ryan, and my synthesis of the thinkers we've looked at. Um, and unless there's anything else you'd like to add, we can shift on to our next area of focus here.
Yeah, let's do it.
So we've talked about some of the key syntheses within our discussion, and how all these different voices come together to give us this more comprehensive understanding and picture of what nature is and our attitudes towards it. So now I'd like to shift into a conversation about some basic principles we can gather from the conversation we've had. And the first of these principles is harks back to Thoreau and Heraclitus and Nietzsche, which is just that we should re-enchant but without naivety. So let Thoreau reopen wonder, but let's keep Heraclitus and Nietzsche at the table, so you don't confuse wonder with anesthesia. The wild heals by revealing. The second principle is to affirm without denial. Say yes to what is, not because it is nice, but because it is necessary, and because you can shape necessity into music. That's Nietzsche's wager. Face the tragic and then compose. The third of these principles is honor limits as love. Anaximander's justice is not a scold, it's the mercy of measure. Boundaries are how beauty lasts. The ritual is a boundary. A Sabbath is a boundary. A trail is a boundary. They don't shrink life, they shape it. Finally, let beings appear. Heidegger's reminder: in a world of dashboards, build clearings, unscored time, unoptimized walks, where things can disclose themselves. The forest is not raw data, it is a presence that answers attention with appearance. These four principles keep each other honest, redemptive without saccharine, tragic without despairing, bounded without cramped, and receptive without passive. So, shifting now from principles to practice, um, if we were to embody these principles, I think we could um, maybe encapsulate it in the following formula: attend, affirm, and articulate. So the first of these is attend, which draws on the wisdom of Thoreau and Heidegger. So go where attention widens. Leave the phone sometimes. Walk until your thoughts begin to flow. Give the world a chance to arrive. For instance, you take a 20-minute phone-free loop after lunch. By minute 7, the mental noise thins. You noticed wind in the cedars and the smell of rain, and a knotty work problem unknots without forcing it. Now, the second of these practices is to affirm. This is drawing on Nietzsche and Heraclitus. When difficulty appears, name it, feel it, and say yes to the reality of it. Then decide what form you will give it. For instance, the trail is closed by blowdown, like storm debris, wood, and so forth obstructing the path. And you feel the frustration and you say a quiet yes to the fact and pivot. You turn back, you slow your pace, you treat the return as a lesson in limits. And perhaps you might count 5 things you can hear on the way out. Then finally, of these practices, articulate. And this is drawing on the wisdom of Apollo and Anaximander, which is just to build one container that makes meaning transmissible. Journal, poem, prayer, plan, conversation, song. Give the chaos edges so it can speak. So for instance, back home you write 10 lines, what you saw, what shifted, and one boundary you'll keep this week. For example, a 2:30 p.m. turnaround on big tasks. That page becomes the cup that carries today's wildness into tomorrow. So, how does all this reframe our hike and our conversation in the studio tonight? Here's how I hear the arc now that we're back and the mud is dried. Thoreau was faithful to what we felt, the way a few hours outside reproportioned the day, softened the jaw, made attention generous. Heraclitus named what we faced, the indifferent waterfall, the same switchback, feeling opposite depending on our breath. Strain as the condition for song. Anaximander held our limits, the body's ledgers, the weather's veto, the mercy of stopping when the light changes. Measure as care. Nietzsche gave us a spine. Don't borrow comfort you haven't earned. Answer the indifferent world with form and style, a deliberate yes. Heidegger made us quieter. He kept asking us to notice how the world was appearing, to let the place speak without turning it into content. This is the stance I want to keep tomorrow. Tender without denial, strong without hardening, a willingness to be taught by the world we love when it counsels and when it refuses to. So I'd like to shift now to one last image. This is kind of to hold everything together, the whole synthesis. If I had to draw it, imagine a lyre strung between 2 trees. Dionysus is the sap, the surge in the wood. Apollo is the string, tension held just so. Heraclitus is the music born of strain. Anaximander is the tuning. Too slack and it's nothing. Too tight and it snaps. Heidegger is the quiet around it, the clearing where the sound can be heard. Thoreau is the ear that hears and the hand that keeps playing. And us, we're the ones who learn to tune, to listen, to play, to repair, again and again as the seasons change. So that's my synthesis. Re-enchant without naivety, affirm without denial, honor limits as love, and keep making clearings where the world can appear. The practice is small and stubborn. Attend, affirm, articulate. So that's my wrap up of the synthesis of all the thinkers we've talked about, Ryan. Is there any final wrap up you'd like to go over before we close?
Yeah, sorry, my dog's just barking in the background.
That's all right.
Just for the listeners, I know we didn't really talk too much about Heidegger, but I just wanted to maybe give another way of kind of understanding what I think Heidegger is getting at. So if you've ever been on a walk, or a hike with a friend, you might see a particular view, notice a sunset or what have you. And what I understand Heidegger to be getting at is, you could, there's kind of two options. Say you're the person that spots the view. You could be like, oh, hey, Grandma, come look at this sunset. Like, it's, you list all the colors, it's just coming over the mountain or going down over the mountain, blah, 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 blah. Like, come look, like, look at it over here. And that's in some sense going against Heidegger's view. Instead, it would be to, admire it in silence. Like, you can stop and allow your friend to notice that you're no longer following. And he might ask, hey, what's going on? What are you doing? And you can silently look at him and just point. And just allow the scene to reveal itself to him. And to show itself forward, right? Rather than sort of dictate or describe it to him beforehand or immediately while he's looking at it.
Right.
Allow the scene to reveal itself to your friend the same way that it was revealed to you. Because, when you're viewing it, you're not having somebody talk to you and describe it to you while you're admiring it. That's not what caught your eye to it.
Right.
It was the sunset revealing itself to you.
Right.
So that's kind of a way that I like to view Heidegger. But in terms of anything else, the handoff or any more of a take, I think I've said what I needed to say. I just wanted to give a bit more maybe perspective on what Heidegger is getting at, just because we didn't really cover him in depth that much.
No, I think that was a good elucidation, and I think time well invested. I think Heidegger is a thinker who's complex, and I feel like we could treat a whole podcast episode on Heidegger on this subject. But it's his core notion is just the basic idea that truth reveals itself, just as a sunset reveals itself, just as a Della Falls reveals itself. It's something you encounter in a clearing, in this space of disclosure where things can appear, right? So when we were on our hike, Della Falls revealed itself to us, in gradual phases, like we could hear the thunder and roar of the falls, from a distance. We could see the mists in the atmosphere around us. We could peer through the cracks in the trees to see a faint image of it, but it didn't really truly reveal itself till we, passed out of the wood into this clearing where the falls just were made manifest. And I think that's a metaphor for the process of how truth reveals itself to us. It's something we see when there is a space to see it in. And that's another facet of nature. as well. So, in any event, let's bring this full circle and conclude things. All right, so let's bring this home. Tonight we held three names for nature: sanctuary, crucible, mirror. Thoreau taught us the force can reproportion a life. Attention widens, hurry shrinks, gratitude returns. The Greeks, and Nietzsche at his fiercest, reminded us that the same force can test us: flux, limit, strife, and the courage to affirm what is. And Heidegger kept our listening honest. Let things appear. Don't turn the world into inventory. If I gather the stance we tried to lift tonight, it's this: re-enchant without naivety, affirm without denial, honor limits as love, make clearings where the world can appear. One way to practice that this week is simple and stubborn. Attend. Take one unscored hour outdoors. No phone, just notice. Affirm. Whatever shows up, weather, mood, memory, say a quiet yes to the fact of it. Articulate. Give it a form. A line in a journal, a sketch, a small promise, a boundary you'll keep. If nature is our sanctuary, let it heal by revealing. If nature is our crucible, let it refine by confronting. If nature is our mirror, let it make us legible to ourselves and each other. Ryan, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think you well summarized things for me and for the audience, whoever's listening.
Good. Well, on that note then, friends, thank you for walking this arc with us. Della Falls still on our boots, even here in the studio. If something in you felt steadier or truer or simply quieter, carry that truth forward. Build one Apollonian form, a ritual or boundary that lets the Dionysian aliveness keep singing tomorrow. Until next time, stay curious, stay rooted, and keep the Dialogos alive.